Yes, Councillor Beach is there.
Trying to get in. No, that's Dawn.
Oh.
I don't know.
So it looks like we are just missing Councillor Hopkins. So I don't know whether he'll be along soon or whether we should simply miss him. I'm also going to announce at the head that at 11:25, halfway through the meeting, we'll be having a 10-minute break. Because 3 hours uninterrupted meeting is not acceptable. And next, we've got apologies for absence from Councillor McCowie, and we've got Councillor Macklin instead. Any declarations of interest? No. So minutes from the previous meeting.
One minor members, in that we omitted Councillor Hopkins from the attendance list, so apologies, we shall correct that.
That's why he's not here yes, you have a point, didn't you?
Yeah, I just need, sorry, I'm speaking slowly. I just want to check that it was reflected in the minutes, Lucy, that the support at the last meeting for kind of mapping the corporate plan across was conditional on your issues, and one of those, we'll talk about that I'm sure in a bit, was around the emission of things like public health, and so I don't know if that was accurately captured in the minutes.
Okay.
And it also sounds like a favourite around this, strategic planning was
Yeah.
the other that was there. I'm
Yes.
not sure if that made it accurately into the minutes,
Yes.
So there is a reference to, there were several cross-cutting issues of significant importance, such as public health, etc., that needed to be given appropriate attention in the policy committee. So that's all it says at the moment. So should we strengthen that comment?
I'd like to, just because there's
It's not in the resolved section, so do you want it to sort of be...
I'm relaxed about how it's shown up, but I just think that it feels when you read it that we agreed unilaterally to map across the corporate strategy, and I don't think we have. However that shows up, I'm sure it's not.
Does anyone else have any more comments in the minutes? No? All right. So that takes us into public forum. I've got this today, which is very helpful, thank you. So we have a number of questions and statements from the public. I will start with the questions, because that's the order I've got. So question 1 is from Dan Ackroyd. Okay.
Sorry, it's a bit early for me. Meetings of Bristol City Council have a recurring problem with senior council members talking out of turn to talk over other people. Currently, the people chairing meetings seem to take no action against this disruption. What changes are going to be made to how meetings are run to make this less of an issue under the committee system?
Yeah, I suppose that's for everyone to ask. Every meeting, really, like, are we all behaving? But does anyone have any specific answer they'd like to give to that? I think the main thing to say is that we're going to be working on a training programme for all councillors coming into next year. And by we, I mean mostly democratic services. So I think it would be very helpful for that to include some chairing training, along with many other things. Guy?
Just a couple of things, if I may say, to say. One would be that I think that the current situation whereby an awful lot of policy content comes through full council, which might in future be delegated to policy committees, might take some of the theatre out of the policy making process, or certainly that's my hope, and that might kind of tamp down a little bit the kind of yaboo that we get in full council. I hear an awful lot from other councillors that full council is their least favourite meeting of all of them, because you tend to get a more collegiate, collaborative atmosphere in those. I'm hoping that'll happen. And the other thing, just to say, kind for what it's worth, I don't think that phenomenon is solely limited to senior council leaders. I've seen plenty of sort of backbenchers and opposition councillors do it as well. But it is something that I think looks awful for the public, and it's something I think we should help to alleviate a little bit at least. I hope.
Chair, I'll try to behave in future. Does that help? Solve the problem?
I don't think you're the worst in the room.
Mid-table at least.
Yeah, I
It's
think
my life.
perhaps also something about like what the chair feels comfortable with and what the public feel comfortable with might be different as well, because the public might get more annoyed than the chair in some cases, or the other way around. I don't know, I think it's quite an insightful point, but it's really to do with sort of how people interact, isn't it? And whether we're given the tools as people who are put in charge or not. Now I've got a whole load of is it worth discussing this more? Do you want more discussion? The press is saying yes. Okay. All right. Who wants to go first? I'll let Lorraine go and then perhaps Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I think it is a good question. I think there's something about, it's not just about having training, that's going to help as far as enabling people to chair committees, etc. But there's something about respect and how we communicate as councillors and how we will communicate as a cohesive group under that framework of a committee type system. So there is something about, it's got to be an internal process first that you show due regard to all, and then that should hopefully transmit itself within the committee meetings when we do meet. So that was just my view. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Helen.
I was just going to remind everybody, well, and members of the public, that we do sign a code of conduct, and that ought to be covered, the issue ought to be covered by what we say in the code of conduct. And presumably when we come on to that, not this committee, because it's another committee's remit, but working out the member development programme for new members, code of conduct will be a part of that.
Yeah. Jeff, did you have?
Yeah, I mean, so we had a meeting earlier in the week to talk through answering questions and decided it would be presumptive to put an answer down that was either an officer or a chair and deputy chair response. For me, I believe we have all the rules in place, and as Helen said, the code of conduct and standing orders actually make it absolutely clear. What we can't do is make chairs enforce them. And I don't believe we can change that in the committee system, but we can adopt the training. But it's also the nature of debate. And so when I was looking at this question, part of my answer would be, well, I don't actually see that interruption happening very often. But then I did think it's still getting presumptive because it might actually be me who's doing it and not realising it. So, but I think we all recognise the rules of debate. It may be that that isn't as clear to members of the public who are watching as we do, because I don't feel I'm on the wrong end of that, and I don't think very often others are. But that might just be a personal view. But the rules are there, and we have to empower those to enforce it. We don't need to change anything else.
Yeah. Heather?
I think that it is likely that people who have been in politics for longer and who are maybe male and older would feel that tension and that aggression less in meetings. So I would say that it probably does exist and you experience it less. We do have a members' code of conduct, and I think the members' code of conduct covers the rules that we need. We have a real issue that the mayor, despite getting a member's allowance, is not held by the members' code of conduct. There is an agreement and a way of behaving, but the most powerful person in the council is not held by that.
Yeah,
So
I think we're starting to go off a bit topic a bit there. Yeah.
But it's talking about what the
well,
situation is now as part of it. So how would be better?
yeah. The mayor, oh, say that louder.
For the record, the mayor is banned by the member of the
Okay.
in the same way that all other councils.
Okay, I had previously heard otherwise when.
Right. I think I'm gonna move us on, but I think that's oh,
Can I just step out of our 2 minutes?
oh, yes, thank you. Sorry. I think I'm going to move on. Right, so yeah, the next question is from, well, the next 4 questions are from.
But now I've got to get a supplementary.
Oh, sorry, yeah, you do, you want?
I'll just make a supplementary comment. It was actually the interruptions of members of the public that I thought was most disrespectful and seemed deliberately designed to throw people off asking their questions clearly. There's a couple of instances from previous years which were bad.
Yeah, I'll give a brief response to that, and that is that there have been public comments that have really deeply personally affected me, and now it's a case of like, sometimes you just have to walk out when the wrong people are asking questions, which does really affect how things are conducted. But conversely, we do have the powers to sort of take people out of the meetings. That is part of the code of conduct and all of our meeting rules. And the public are reminded at the start of meetings to conduct themselves with respect and tolerance and behave well. So there is justification to throw people out, which has been done in the past a few times. So yeah, I think it's something that will be carried over, but perhaps chairs might need to be empowered a little bit more to make sure they have the skills. Right, I will move on to Clive. Yes, with your 4 points. Yeah, and supplementary. Remind me that you have supplementaries because I completely get them out of order every time.
Thank you very much. Good to see you all. So my first question, which is down as question 2 here, is in February you devoted your time to scrutiny, and one of the decisions you made was to have an escalation panel. It's defined in the minutes, but it strikes me there's a lot more work to be done, and I see from the answer that you're going to be planning your work programme in July, so I'm sure you'll be delighted to hear I should put my statement in July about the escalation panel. So that's that first question. The second question is about roles and responsibilities to councillors, which is on today's agenda. And I think you need to add scrutiny in there. I know it's your intention to have most of the scrutiny done in the committees. So, and the answer is members of the working group are invited to share their views. So I hand back to your chair on this one.
Yeah, so my answer was that rather than starting that discussion now, I've put it on my thing, like you've got on my list of things to say, if that's okay, and we'll all take that as something that we discussed during the substantive debate, rather than answering it now, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So my third one, which is down as Q4, was about being very difficult. Being very difficult to be impartial. I see you have followed the Nolan principles, which also asks chairs to be impartial. I'll leave Bristol Council alone now and reflect on whether I should raise this issue with the Nolan principles, but I probably won't. So moving on to my last one, which is about going back to the escalation panel. I asked in my question whether the monitoring officer could confirm whether an amendment like the one I've put in, so I'm not asking you to confirm that it will be done, but whether it could be done, i.e. it's legal to do that later on, so that it would, the idea is that on a committee, a minority of councillors could bring a report up to the escalation panel. So my question is whether or not that's a possible thing to do.
So the monitoring officer, I suppose, responds, well, is it possible? I think it's possible.
I guess, Chair, it kind of goes to the heart of decision making by policy committees and what the purpose of the escalation panel will be. We established at the earlier meeting in February that there would be set criteria for escalation of matters to that escalation panel. We've yet to work through the detail of that. Clearly, the number of councillors that can make such a referral, escalate a matter, needs to be worked through. I'm not quite sure what a minority report would be in those circumstances. It's quite a specific thing under our current scrutiny arrangements, where a scrutiny commission would prepare a minority report back to the executive as a complement to the main report coming from the scrutiny commission. So I think it needs a little bit more thought and consideration as part of that wider discussion further on the work programme.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone else like to have any comments? Jeff? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, I don't think we're actually approaching this from a different point of view, Clive, but to me, a minority report to an escalation panel is actually saying this is something where there's a pretty wild difference of opinion. I can see a situation where minutes of a committee meeting would have a minority having an opinion. And had the committee system existed, you would have been doing that on a number of occasions. I envisage if I'm on a committee, I may well be putting in a minority comment. But it won't always go to escalation just because one disagrees with the decision that's being taken. So I think you're making several steps here that aren't necessary, but there is no reason why minutes can't note a concern. And to be honest, if it's a minority that disagree, I'd be questioning, even if I supported that view, I'd question whether it should be going to escalation. It's only if actually a majority disagree that it should be going to escalation. So the whole escalation thing has got to evolve. We've got to see, if you looked at scrutiny calling, when this was being discussed in the early stages, there was a fear from whoever was in the administration that 10 items a month might be going to calling. In fact, if it's one a year, it's quite remarkable. So actually, this is a question of something that's got to be workable as a process, but not that stops the council from making decisions that need to be made. So it's got to evolve, it's got to be flexible, and we can't prescribe that a minority report isn't appropriate. But actually, if a group of members wanted to put in a statement to that escalation panel, they could do so. And I want to keep it flexible rather than prescriptive, because if we make it prescriptive, we can guarantee it won't work because we won't have thought of something. Whereas if we keep it open, it can develop according to best practice and the way council interacts.
So do you have a supplementary that you want to ask now? Do you want to hear some more?
The only thing I'd like to add, and it's not a question, is that Jeff's point illustrates that I suspect you'll need to re-debate this and work harder on the role of the escalation panel in the autumn.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm gonna. Well, I'll take Guy's point, and then I'll move this on. I think. Or Lorraine.
Go for it.
No, so I.
All right, Lorraine.
I just wanted to say that yes, I was going to slightly disagree with a point Councillor Gollop made about if there's a minority voice objecting to something, because that's the world we live in. That sometimes the minority will also or often object to the wider view, and it doesn't mean that the minority view is not the right one or the right path that we should take. But I concur with your last statement that work needs to be done, and it is not a done deal.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement that this is something that we need to debate more because it's so vague at the moment and it's fairly central to some of the process that we're going to have. So, yeah, we'll be scheduling it when we're doing the scheduling. Right, let's move on to Suzanne. So, yeah, you've got 2 questions.
Yes, so the paper that you have on the roles and responsibilities of councillors, I can see that focuses, on practicality, and that makes sense that you have to get that organised. It does reference the high standards of ethical conduct, but there's nothing specific or no cross-referencing to what those ethical high standards are, and I just wondered whether, if that is going to be a paper somewhere, there could be a short paragraph that actually refers to what those standards are. I'm assuming that's knowing principles.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it should be in there. So I suppose that'll be part of the debate as in the next section, if that's okay. I've noted it down in the same way that I've noted down Clive's point. There's something that we might want to specifically put in, so when we get to that part of the report.
And then my second question, it seems to be a theme actually at the beginning of this of your whole meeting, but it's about the code of conduct. And it seems that people are sworn in and they say that, and then sitting around this table almost, even now, I can feel people saying, well, we know that, we signed it. And it isn't always obvious as an observer that it is being followed. In fact, I think there are quite a few examples, where it isn't. So I just wondered, is there sort of ongoing training when people reminded, or is it something that's signed, they've done that, and then on you go to the councillor?
I think every time you sign a paper, so once every 4 years, I guess, is the answer, I think. Yeah.
Just to provide a bit further context, so as the council's monitoring officer, I'm available for councillors at all times to provide advice on matters relating to their codes of conduct. Just looking around the room, I'm sure I've provided advice to several councillors in this meeting at various points in time. We do provide training as set out in the written response, but we also do provide reminders to councillors about maintaining their registers of interest, and those come through to me on a regular basis when updates are provided to them. So I'm confident that councillors are aware of their wider obligations under the Code of Conduct. Hopefully that gives a little bit more of the context and support that we provide to councillors. Thank you.
Yeah, I think,
So just a bit of a supplementary. It does seem to hinge hugely on councillors doing the right thing. And as far as I can tell, because I've asked about, if people haven't put something on the register of interest, and I'm just told it's up to the councillor to do that. I'm not quite sure what the process is if they haven't done it and they should have. Is it just taken for granted where they should have done it and they haven't bothered to say nothing can be done? Or is there some check or something that happens to make sure, rather than marking their own homework?
If I may, Chair, so there's various categories of interest. Councillors have a legal duty to declare their disclosable pecuniary interests. It's a matter of personal judgment for individual councillors whether or not they declare other non-pecuniary interests. I'm always available to provide advice as necessary to councillors on those interests, whether they're disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests. But as I said, it's a matter of personal judgment for councillors at the end of the day.
I suppose the point that you're making is that in order to uphold the law, the councillors have to decide to uphold the law, and you're like, that's where corruption happens. Yeah, and I suppose that there's potentially more space for investigating or checking, that sort of thing. I don't know whether that's how public scrutiny is supposed to work, isn't it? I don't know whether anyone's got any further points to make on that. I'll go to Helen.
Well, just to say that if people are aware of a transgression on that, then they can put in a complaint or a question to council or to the monitoring officer. And certainly I think we've had a couple of occasions in the past when that has happened. Nothing has, to my knowledge, been found to be sustained on those things, but there's that mechanism.
Does that make sense? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Jeff.
Well, I was only just going to comment. You said, Chair, about there could be more checking. I'm sure Tim's got plenty of spare hours in his but actually, I haven't got the faintest idea where an officer would begin checking. It has to be on the onus of the member to declare, and any member who feels they have a doubt as to whether they've got a conflict should be seeking advice at that point. It has to be self-regulating, and I certainly I could not support a system that saw someone checking all my details in a way that they could identify. I hope they wouldn't find anything that I hadn't disclosed, and if they had, it was purely by oversight. But I really think we've got to be careful what we're suggesting here. Any form of corruption where someone has a financial benefit and is not disclosing it and is taking advantage of it, then the legislation, as I understand it, it's absolutely clear cut on the fact that there's been a breach, and any evidence of that should be pursued. There isn't a history of that in Bristol, and I think we need to be careful what we're suggesting, because from my experience, members of all parties are complying as best they can. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but and it's not the sort of thing one has any pleasure in pointing out in public if it's not. So I think we need to be careful what we say and how we express it.
Yeah. Who wants to go out of you two and then I'll move on? Okay.
I would say it's not self-regulating. I would say it is regulated by the public. The point is that our interests are public, and I'm not saying that a lot of the public engage, but the people in this room are engaging, and people do ask questions, whether the questions start on Twitter and then get somewhere further, but they do ask questions, they do go to Tim, they do go to other councillors. So the whole point of the system isn't that politicians check themselves, the point is that everything's public, and the press and the public check. So, thank you for those that do engage. Not massive numbers, but, that is how it works, and the only way it can work.
All right. I think that's that. So we've got how many public statements? We've got 4 public statements. Of those, I think 2 people are here. So that's Suzanne. Do you want to give a summary of your public statement?
Yeah, and it sort of relates to the general discussion that we've had. But I think, obviously, I don't want to go over problems all the time, but I do think it is important to remember why you're here, and that people have rejected an elected mayor and want a committee system that's an improvement, and some of that focus has been to do with transparency and the whole thing about scrutiny. And I don't think that is just my opinion, because I think the external auditors have questioned some of what's gone on. So it was just a sort of reminder that I suppose when we're sitting here, we're kind of hoping to see things that are going to improve the situation, especially in relation to transparency and scrutiny.
Thank you. And yeah, Dave Redcross not here. But it was a pretty interesting statement. Yeah, and Clive.
Okay, I'll keep this very brief. So this is to do with item 6 on your meeting, policy committees. The author of the report has asked, should oversight of risk be included in the committee? And I would argue the answer is yes to all of them. The way it worked when I was on audit committee was the audit committee checked that the risk system was working, but decision makers, who will now be the committees, must use the risk system in order to assess the risks of different options and to mitigate those risks. So that's the end of my statement.
Great, thank you. And our fourth statement reader is not here, so we will move on to item 6, policy committees, structure and responsibilities, part 2. So, yeah, did you want to just take us through this a little bit?
Yes, no, it's just a brief introduction. So as the Chair says, this is part 2. So you'll recall at your March meeting, you did agree that there would be 7 policy committees in the new structure, and they would be more or less based on corporate themes, with the exception, though, that the Effective Development Organisation would be replaced with the Strategy and Resources Committee. So in order to help you put some more sort of details on what the roles and remits of those policy committees would be, you asked for a few more bits of information, which is in your report. So you're interested to know, what a year of cabinet decisions would look like and how that would appear if it was mapped against the policy committee. So that's in your report. Also a few other bits of information to help you make an informed decision. So the other thing that you asked us to do was go away and have a look at if we mapped the cabinet member portfolios against the policy committees, what would that look like? So in your report there's 2 options. In the first option, in the first table, there's minimal changes. So as you can see, and hopefully the system I've used for the asterisks makes sense, we just tried to map the closest cabinet member portfolio to the closest corporate theme with minimal changes, as I've said. Although of course you will note that there are 9 cabinet member portfolios and dropping down to 7 policy committees, so there were some changes required. Then in the second table, that's where there's been a few more amendments made. So really that's just to try and even up workloads and see better alignment. So remember, the options are here before you, so you're asked to select if either of those 2 look acceptable to you, or indeed whether you wish to make any changes. The only other thing I would say is that whatever you agree today doesn't need to be the final situation with this. You will have the opportunity to make further tweaks to the policy committee roles and remits in the future, either before May 2024 or after.
All right. First question is from Nicola, actually.
So I apologise because I wasn't in the agenda sector on annual leave, so I'm apologising that this came a bit late in the day. So following these break, I've been speaking to cabinet members about these papers to try and just gauge their reflections on kind of how this would work in practice. And they've made some really pragmatic suggestions, so I'll talk it through now in the room, but I sent it over to Jenny last night. Notably, breaking out homes and communities, and that's why I referenced the minutes in the previous session, because I think we should consider an additional committee taking the number up to 8, which is a Public Health and Communities Committee, which is much broader than housing and homes, but with giving housing and homes delivery, or some sort of edit on that name, its own standalone committee. There's a big part of this to consider about health generally, and as soon as I start talking, I'm going to step out of my expertise because it's obviously Helen's role at the moment, and so I might make way for Helen, if that's okay, Chair, just to walk through some of the reflections that there's been on the whole health space. But my first recommendation, it's been completely positive intent, just genuinely sharing the papers with the people that do jobs at the moment, and that is their unbalanced recommendation. And the more I think about it, I think if we want public health to sit throughout this organisation, I think this is a good thing to do. But Helen, do you mind talking through the health elements of it, because it's quite complex and there's lots of nooks and crannies that I think Helen...
Well, I can, but I just wonder whether or not...
Yeah,
initial responses to what you said.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my initial response is that, so in the 2 options that we've got, you can't really see from the back, but this amount is basically all the community stuff. And whichever portfolio it gets combined into is going to be as long as my arm, although I do have very small arms. So I think it's a valid...
What is that noise? Yeah.
Whose
hearing aid is going on?
Yes.
It's not mine.
Well, that's really discombobulating me. So I think it's a valuable question to ask, but I think it might be useful to kind of ask it in the general, like if we go around and see how people feel about it, where it's split up into, and whether we think it is so big. I think that's a third option that's on the. Sorry. Really? Yes, please.
And I would say just
stop. I'm sorry. We're all fine.
Perhaps I should have explained as well that I don't think we should underestimate the role of our HRA and our role as a landlord, particularly as we step to 2030. There is a huge volume of work to decarbonise our housing stock, and that is incredibly complex. And so the homes bit is kind of our role as a landlord, a landowner, and housing delivery generally in the city and policy around homes, which is also a fast changing area. Also speaking so much of the door, so I'll pause there. But
yeah,
that was a combined thing.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
Can you just clarify the proposal again? Because obviously
Well,
what's
I think
separating
at the outset, I think we're just going to have a little discussion and see what people think about effectively where the and communities section should lie. So in the papers we've got two options. One is, the first one is Homes and Communities, which is the name of the actual corporate goal. In the second option, it's economy, skills and communities. And then the third option would be having economies and skills and homes and communities as being three separate.
Public health.
And public health, yeah. Oh, maybe I'm confused then. Where's public health in here?
Well, it isn't. That's
It
one of
isn't.
the problems. So,
yeah, it's sort of across things.
So, sorry, it's Nicola, could you repeat
Yeah,
your
of course.
proposal?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry,
Yeah,
about
so that's fine.
That's
So,
all.
no, not a problem. I appreciate that I kind of
So
stepped
a
in
third
early
one
doors.
that's
Yeah,
a third
so-
one that's public health and communities.
Yes, but there would be,
yeah.
so essentially what we would have is an additional committee, is the headline. That committee would be called Public Health and Communities. The Homes Committee is dedicated to homes and housing, so it is what that includes our HRA and all the things that, you know, our role as a corporate, as a landlord. And then the one that's health and well-being, there's a health and well-being committee, which is what Helen will talk through in a bit, which we think should be dedicated to adult social care and adults. Because of it's over 50% of our budget, it's a significant pressure and it's incredibly complex and getting more complex space. Economy and skills remains, and that's it in a nutshell.
Okay.
I think.
I got it
If
that
that's
time.
useful, yeah. No, it's okay. I appreciate. I just stepped in early doors, but I just needed to say that. If I'd been in the agenda set meeting, this would have happened a bit quicker. So I apologise.
Oh, right. So that makes sense to everyone. I don't know what order, so I'm going to just go that way round. So Councillor Eddy, then Councillor Holland, then Matt, then Hopkins.
I have to say, Councillor Beecher's proposal seems eminently sensible to me. At the end of the day, the administration have hands-on experience of the decisions, the capacity and the challenges. So I think we need to actually listen strongly to their experience. I'm not as au fait with public health or health, also I defer to Helen and others, but clearly actually having something clearly directed at that. I must say, as cabinet member, I had a housing brief, and it seems to me your proposal to actually have the focus upon that is key as well. So I fully support the aspiration.
Right, Councillor Holland.
I'll come back to the wider health thing, because I think we need an adult social care thing, because I think we need to look at that a bit more. But on the public health point, new readers start here, because that's not... public health was split by the government from the NHS. I can't remember when it was, 7, 8 years ago. Much to the NHS's annoyance, because the money used to sit with them. And the thinking about that was to connect it to local authority services. And I think the point is, and I'm sure that I don't think Ellie's been able to join us today, but it's the point that she made at the last meeting, is that we've taken an approach here, and many other councils have as well, about public health being in kind of every policy. And so to bung it with adult social care kind of loses that connection across the piece and that multi-agency approach. So it's everything from, again, if Ellie was here, she talks about the role of parks, the libraries, sport, food policy, all of those things within public health. So it's not just the smoking, drugs and alcohol, obesity, that kind of headlines that people think of. So I do think that separating it from adult social care for those reasons and making sure we keep that cross-cutting agenda in public health is really important, and the place to do that is within communities.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Matt.
So I was a big fan of the focusing on corporate themes in the committees. I think that in terms of planning the strategy and the ambitions for the council, agreeing in our plans and then having those themes, having an ambition for each of those committees, each of those areas, and then those committees working towards those ambitions. So I liked that idea. We start off with a document that will last 4 years, 6 years, however long we can do, and then we know that those committees are set with that. So for that reason, but that's not how we work at the moment. So we have one corporate strategy, but maybe the next corporate strategy we would be very aware that actually public health and communities needs its own. So although I really like that strategy, I'm happy for that to be a bit different as long as in the future we're trying to align our corporate strategy to our committees. I think it's also worth remembering that these committees will be about political decisions, not about all operational decisions. And if you look at the logs of decisions being made, we've talked already about, although there's tons of items within that health and public health, it's not a massive amount of decisions that are currently being made by Cabinet. So there's a lot of subjects in there, but it's not necessarily loads of work and decisions. But I think I do agree. I just would like in future to see that then our corporate strategy starts to align to our committees, that this would be a bit temporary, that they don't align.
I think that's a really interesting and somewhat controversial point, to say that we should be aligning our strategy to our committees. Because that's putting the cart before the horse, isn't it, Helen?
We agreed to have committees based on the themes of the corporate strategy.
Yeah. So the way you just phrased that made it sound like we should, if we have certain committees, that we would then design our themes around those. That's what you.
We have themes at the moment.
Yeah.
When we work on the next strategy, we would have a number of themes.
And we would bear in mind how they're going to fall into committees. You think?
No, I think the committees should always align to our corporate strategy, and if we have 9 themes, 7 themes in our corporate strategy, which is what we're the things that us as a council are prioritising, then those should be the. I did make this point. I definitely made this was my argument for doing.
I guess that is a possibility that we could reallocate the committees whenever.
And that I made that point last time.
But it's not a necessary part of the system, I guess.
Well, it's a system that aligns to our corporate.
We can't promise that now.
No, we can't promise that, but we have chosen a system that aligns to our corporate themes at the moment.
You made another point about work versus decisions, and I think that that's something. I've just put that down as something to sort of debate in a minute, because like the number of decisions versus the amount of work, the number of committee meetings versus the amount. I think there's something about that.
How much is policy development, how much is operational, sort of around that?
Yeah, that sort of thing. So I think there's another discussion about that I'm going to bring us back round to. I've got Councillor Hopkins, Gollop, Pulteney and Francis.
As well as the part of work, exactly things achieved, which is sometimes a different matter from items in this portfolio should actually be dealt with by local decision making. That's what communities are supposed to be all about. And we have not addressed that issue properly, and until we do, we're going to have a position where, happens at the moment, where huge amounts of time are wasted by local routes, very frustrating, because of centralised decisions taken by people who don't know what the hell is going on. And I'm afraid that, we must have a structure that properly allows for devolution of powers to local committees, and I mean local committees, not these groups that we have at the moment, and that therefore local people can feel that they're involved, and that also that solves the problem of engagement, because it's been rightly pointed out that public engagement is a very poor level, and until we work things more at the local level and take decisions at a level where we can actually get involved, it's always going to be a problem. Expect everybody to come up here and listen to us talking in a committee like this, and then actually what's actually said and not actually happening. I'll give you an example. We passed an amendment to Cabinet, to the Budget Council, which the Cabinet are now trying to change in the way that it's actually operating, much to the annoyance of local councillors and the local groups involved. And quite frankly, that sort of thing is giving the council a very poor reputation. So until we actually put in place proper thought as to how we're going to devolve one of these structures, they'll be struggling. Public health doesn't belong with communities, it doesn't belong with adult social care. But I find it very interesting when I'm questioning on public health. The details are very, very woolly that actually come back. And I know a lot of these decisions have to be taken advantage of with other places. But budget is not easy to tie down. And really, we need to be in a position of better understanding how public health money is actually spent. And again, aligning it with proper community work would help us to do that.
I think the interesting point about what you just said there is, that some of this could go into the next area committees, whatever that might be, which we're going to talk about later in the year, next time, I think. And I do sort of want to leave space to take some of the, excuse me, some of the fine-grained stuff, like that obviously we need to have a library strategy, that has to come to full council, and that should be done by a committee, obviously, but how a particular library operates might be something, I don't know, maybe this is a bad example, but it might be something that a local area committee thingy would want to talk about. So I'll invite just comments about that. Next, I've got Councillor Gollop.
Right, now I know this will come as a surprise, but I'm going to largely disagree with what Gareth just said. I have no problem, and I'm very keen to see local decision making developing, but we cannot go into detail of local decision making whilst we're trying to totally revamp the way council works. That has to be a year later. I can only see disaster happening if we try and do the two together. We have to get this bit right first. So the basic discussions on committees, I agree with everything Nicholas said. It seems to me that public health and housing are two fundamental areas that are actually a key to dealing with inequality. And if we don't actually identify them in a committee that will give them priority, then they will not receive the attention they deserve. Whilst I'm worried that I understood some of the points Heather was making more than a member of her own party, I disagreed with one point in particular, which is that just because public health may not have that many items coming to Cabinet for decision, actually what it does, and the pandemic has highlighted it even more, is so fundamental to us that there is a danger that if we only look at the number of key decisions, we could lose some really important things from actually almost featuring. So I see that. The one reservation I have is that if we go to 8 committees, I just trying to do the sums of how many people will we have on each committee and how many members do we have, and we've got regulatory committees to operate as well. So we've actually got to think about what workable numbers are for committees and how we don't end up doubling the committee workload of all members. I think we do need to bear that in mind. The other comment I wanted to make was on resources and finance issues, because looking at the number of cabinet decisions, resources has a significant number, but actually probably half of those are related to finance monitors and the budget process. That may be too much for one committee, and therefore we may be talking about a budget working group, sort of finance working group, as we have at the moment, but that's effectively a second committee. And that working group currently has more meetings than any other scrutiny, or almost all the other scrutiny commissions put together. So we do need to think through the mechanism that we need the committees to have enough members to be able to be both proportionate without large roundings of fraction of numbers, enough members to actually have a debate and to carry out what Clive was calling the scrutiny role. I actually see scrutiny as replaced by a decision-making role, where for me I'd be asking more questions when I'm making a decision than I would be when I'm scrutinising. But how do we create the numbers that are right to make that work without creating a workload that will be impossible for members, particularly those that work as well, to actually fit in the process. So that's the challenge.
Yeah.
That's not a reason to not pursue the extra committee. I'm convinced of that, but we can't just pursue it and not acknowledge the numbers implications and the counts and members available time to fulfil the role.
I think there's an interesting point here, which I guess maybe we want to we talk about again, just quickly, which is not all committees have to meet at the same frequency, and I don't think all committees have to be the same size. So, I mean, the silliest way of solving this would be that we had the Homes and Communities be one committee that just has twice as many people on it, and then they go into 2 subgroups, subcommittees. That's how we could think of it. But yeah, so what I'm hearing so far is that there hasn't been much dissent about splitting out the communities and public health into its own remit. Yeah, I don't. There's too much else to summarise at this point. So I'll keep going round. So I've got councillors Pulteney, then Francis, then Beach, then Penn. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I do sympathise just looking at the volume of headings against each brief, trying to figure out what would go into what, even under the 2 models that I have written out in front of me is quite difficult. I didn't hear anything Councillor Beach said to kind of radically disagree with. I think as someone who's held both the communities brief and the housing brief, doesn't agree with the narrative, but Councillor Hopkins' point is quite apt. I think there is a particular worry, and I should say, I think public health might be one of those things where we want to consider an option not dissimilar to the option that we have for equalities, even though we're not legally required to do so, where decisions of all committees are subject to a public health impact assessment, or something along those lines, and that might do an awful lot to spread that workload across other committees, and obviously there's a huge amount of commissioning that the public health role does that couldn't do that with, but it might be something that's worth putting on the table. I would be slightly worried, just looking down, my assumption would be, under the Homes and Communities brief as outlined on page 18, I forget which option it is now, option 1. But let's look at it under option 2, because I think that's probably the one that we're leaning more towards, but let's find where it was. Too many headings.
Healthcare and well-being, or the homes? Which one? Sorry.
The point I was going to make, apologies, page 18 is the place where it's easiest to visually kind of make sense of it. At the very bottom of homes and communities, it makes reference to a regulatory and licensing function.
Yeah.
Now, the word function there jumps out at me. I would not wish to assume that homes and communities is going to be replacing the licensing and planning. The regulatory committees, right? It should. So it should. To me, it should refer to regulatory and licensing committees, or executive function, or it should refer to something that very clearly differentiates it. But there is an extra. I'm correct.
Yes. So when Tim and I reviewed the list, we actually thought that one needed a bit of clarification, because it doesn't make sense, does it? To be listed in that way, so it's not in option 2. So other functions that are related are in option 2, but not that particular title.
So because obviously there is an executive element to both planning and licensing and PSP, where does that sit in the option 2? I suppose is what I'm asking.
I did notice some.
Obviously, so Jenny, can I just come in on that, because that was another sort of adaptation. So take the role of the local plan working group, right, plan policy as an example. I think strategic planning would sit in that strategy space in this example, because there's a mistake to think that planning is just about house building, but it's actually about the economy as well. And so we need to lift it from the kind of homes-led, as important as homes are, into a how to build a city, because that brings in all those dynamics about placemaking. And so I think that on the licensing one, I think that's the broader regulatory services, kind of all the things to do with trading standards, for instance. There's lots more regulatory services than just licensing. I'm not sure where that goes, to be honest, Guy. When I looked at it, I couldn't find a natural thing. But it does need one.
I was going to say, my concern would be, currently you have obviously licensing as an example, licensing committee sets, licensing policy, and you have the quasi-judicial functions exercised by the subcommittees, taking advice from one portfolio area, that's to say, or one potential portfolio area, which is licensing and regulatory function. At the same time, all philosophy input to that committee, in effect, sides in that quasi-judicial process, sits under other headings. And we need to absolutely ensure that, for example, something like pollution control couldn't sit within the same committee, because what you don't want, for example, just to make it real, you wouldn't want the public showing up to a planning hearing to see on the quasi-judicial unbiased committee making a decision on this planning application, all of the councillors that have been saying in the committee that deals with strategic housing, it is absolutely essential that we build more houses in this specific area or that specific area. In licensing, that moves from a potential conflict of interest to something a bit more serious, because there are all sorts of statutory guidelines, and at the same time, you wouldn't want to be in a situation where you, again, using licensing as an example, privileging one of the 4 pillars of licensing policy, public health, above, for example, protection of children from harm. I think regulatory is something you need to go into a lot of detail on just to get right. That's probably something else to come back on, but I'm just not in quite enough detail to put my mind at ease on it at this point. And just as a final thing to come back on Gary's and Jeff's points that were being made, apologies, I do see where Jeff is coming from, but I don't think it's necessarily I don't think it could be maybe the best approach to be ruling out options on the basis that there'll be too much for the committees to do, and then say, but we also can't assume that they're going to give any of their decision-making powers away for a year. If we build a whole system around an assumption that the committees will be doing everything and nothing will be delegated to neighbourhoods for a full year, then we'll come up with a completely different model. And we'll end up having to redesign the whole system a year later anyway if we want to do that. So I do think it's something we need to have a very clear eye on. as we go through this process. Because I can, again, every time I look through this list, I see something, a decision that I feel would be made at negative level. And there's not a portfolio that's untouched. I really think it's something, yeah.
Yeah. So there's sort of two main points on that. I think we do need to think about Guy's point. I suppose it's different between how like the Councillor Eddie is both chair of planning and on local plan. I think that's different to licensing, and you pointed that out. So you don't want people to feel too defensive about that. But yeah, it moves from a potential conflict of interest to something that could be actually quite serious. But I think both the conflict of interest is serious. You know what I'm trying to say. Something even more serious. That's what you said. I'm not familiar enough with licensing and so forth to provide an opinion. But I think that's the best I can do to summarise that. And it would be probably quite useful to maybe hear a little bit from officers about how you think we should take that forward, because I think it is a important part of this, and kind of where licensing stuff in particular regulation lies and how that might interact. Oh yes, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to chime in, but I thought it might be useful to speak to my experience as chair of licensing, because I don't think it's ever been fully clear to me where my role fits in and where executive insight comes in, because, you know, the licensing committee's remit is relatively broad, and there's a lot of areas that get drawn into that. There's some issues where, you know, something will be covered by the Mayor's office, some licensing, or I see them as licensing issues, which also cover things like when a business put in tables and chairs in the public highway that comes into transport, and that has a lot of grey areas. My experience as someone who's, you know, coming to chair the committee in a position that's not, you know, paid at all, remunerated. I've not got that capacity to give it the time that a cabinet member would. But there's been a lot of these issues which I'm not quite sure where they sit. We've led on quite complex decision making, things like sexual entertainment venues and, you know, these sort of things. That's quite a clear part of us. So I think possibly working with the licensing team to draw out what does sit with licensing and what sits with another committee and where that policy sits. Because, you know, there's examples like the Tables and Chairs Working Group, which is something that we're trying to establish to work out how we set policies for when outside businesses can put tables and chairs outside. There's been other issues about, you know, businesses previously during COVID having structures on the highway. So I think it's worth a bit more work then, possibly getting the license.
So I think that's the. I'd like to invite that we resolve that particular point, that sort of bullet point, gets a bit more attention, and at some later stage.
Yeah, I do.
So we can agree something today with the proviso, very specifically, that licensing be looked at for more detail and broken out between the regulatory and whatever committee it goes into in a more nuanced and just extra thought. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah.
Well, just very quickly, I think let's just do this anyway, but I just think we need to matrix it and probably find the answer presents itself. So for instance, you couldn't be a Gorham Homes board member and sit on development control. So once you start to put the power, the verticals and the horizontals, you'll see where those roles and conflicts will dive out actually around kind of HRA and development control.
Okay.
Those positions will present themselves. I think if you do that work, then it'll fall out of that quite quickly.
Right. Going back into the order. Oh no, there was a second point Guy made. That this local decision-making debate does need to happen next month, not now. I think so. We're kind of all, I think, coalescing around the idea of having homes and housing, what was the other one? Economy, skills, and communities and public health as 3 different things.
And then the well-being and health.
And then the well-being and health, yeah, has adult social care in it. Yeah, the other things will be unaffected. I think we're all, sorry, so you are next, Lorraine, but I guess I'm specifically trying to make the point, wherever communities ends up, some of these decisions, or not decisions, the little remits in it, things like, I don't know, parks, events and carnivals, I think we should leave it open to our discussion next month as to whether we want to allocate anything in particular, where the committee for communities would be in charge of policy, and we may want to delegate some of that to area committees or whatever it is. I think that what I'm trying to say is whatever decision we make today, it's probably fair to say that that part of it, there's a sliver that we're going to leave open and fully debate at a later time. Is that clear at least? Jeff, and I don't want to debate it now.
No,
it's basically
the bit that it wasn't clear from that explanation is where health scrutiny is going. In that, I'm sure there's an answer, but I think we ought to limit the answer so that we don't have to keep asking the questions. So
That's the bit that I suggested we park, and I'll come in on the wider adult social care and health in a bit. So if you want to take the
we're still going around.
the rest
I
of
haven't
those
come to
then I'll come to
yeah.
that.
All right. Okay. Councillor Francis. Sorry, it has been a while. We've still got other people as well.
I had a couple of observations really. So in both proposals, under the health and well-being, healthcare and well-being, I kind of my head is sort of trying to configure this. I actually think, and I don't know if Helen will just zone into this, that adult social care should be the main headline. So column 1, I'm giving it a name. And then the other bits then come into column 2, because adult care would be the overarching area, and then things such as the ICS programme should go on with that, because it's the new integrated care system, which will incorporate aspects of working in how we work in the community as under adult social care and how it filters into statutory duties. So there's that element there. So I think there needs to be a jiggling of how we refer to adult social care, and it shouldn't be, I don't like the heading healthcare and well-being. It's not that straightforward, and it's a statutory function, right? So that's one point. I have to make sure I said that correctly. That's why I was getting emotional. So I didn't even thought. So there's that. And then the third columns in both option 1 and 2 says, should health scrutiny be addressed via a standing subcommittee? Now, what do we mean? So health.
That's the part that I think we're going to invite.
So health. I'm just saying, can I sit on health scrutiny? That is parked separately, and it can't be any other way. And I do understand where Jeff is coming from about numbers of committees, but I did say, actually, I'm going to say this out loud, I was heading for 9, even though I know there would be ramifications. I know we're having to switch it into 7 for economic reasons, I understand. But I do think 7 is a push with all the other nuances that we've talked about today. And finally, I could be jumping the gun, so don't shoot me down with quotes, but I can't see audit in this, and I am not an audit expert or anything at all, but audit anyway.
So it's regulatory, it's like
that's
licensing
regulatory.
and
So we're not talking about audit because
No, I know.
because it's regulatory.
Yeah. Right,
Although
okay.
having said that, if there's an intersection, but I feel as though
that's fine.
When there is a discussion maybe about how risk is handled that I want to bring up, and that should probably be where we sort of maybe mention audit.
Thank you.
Next, I have Councillor Beach. Cool, thanks. This has been a really good debate.
debate. So I think on balance 8 is the sweet spot, and in fact I'm not just saying that because of my communities and things, but in terms of work, the conversation generally. I agree with Councillor Paul's observation about the regulatory functions. I think that needs some real thought, but it will also be an onus on groups to make sure they apportion their membership appropriately for that in terms of how that's managed. Will also be a group function. There are a few things missing. I know you've mapped the delegations, but the other ask that came from my engagement with the cabinet members was, could you do a bit of a loop back and check with those cabinet members about their work? So, for instance, there's nothing on food. It's hugely important. We do a lot on food. In the council, as you can imagine, equalities with a big E. You know, and so I just think that, just for completeness, it would be good to go back. And I'm slightly nervous about if there's members of staff in this building who work in those areas and their departments aren't on this list, but there's a bit of a communications issue there that makes me nervous. So just to reassure anyone that they are clear about this, that, you know, it's a work in progress. And then the last one is around budget. Just my observation on Jeff's point about budget. I think every committee is a budget holder, and they're going to have those budget reports at the top of the agenda at their meetings. So those budget papers are going to be a constant. They are within the cabinet now, as you can probably imagine. So for like particularly those needs-based services, demand-led services like adults and children's, the connection between service and budget is absolutely critical. And that's not going anywhere, and so I think it won't just sit in the, I don't want any suggestion that just sits in the economy section or the strategy section. That will sit throughout the entire cycle. Every single committee will carry that on their backs, and I'll pause there.
And that's one of the budget, I think, is one of the subjects we're going to have to discuss after the break. What did you say? So extra work, basically. I think we'll just note that, yeah, we'll go through every single department in the whole council and make sure it's got somewhere to go. That's obviously necessary. Right, I've got Councillor Kent, and then.
I know, the big reveal.
We might have to put it after the break. I might actually do that because.
It's fun.
Yes.
When you look at these decisions, there's always good and bad on both sides. I mean, such as obviously increasing the amount of committees increases the amount of workload on councillors, in the sense that we're then putting another 9 extra sort of seats that we've got to fill. At the same time, it spreads the decision making. I can go along with the proposal made. I think it's not unreasonable, and some good arguments have been made. I do want to say that some of our members of this committee feel very strongly that we do need to be looking at area committees. I realise you don't open that debate. I just want to point out, at no point has this committee ever agreed to delay the start of the work on area committees. There's no decision that's ever been made by this committee. A few members have suggested it in debate, but it's never been agreed. I just wanted to sort of put that on the record. When we come into that next month, I don't want that to be a starting place, because some of us do not think that's where the starting place should be. On health scrutiny, my worry is, of course, we agreed to 8, and then, we're going to have a separate subcommittee, that's 9. I actually think it's a very good case, and I was going to delve into this, I have no idea what she's about to say, of trying to bring that into those relevant committees. And what I was going to argue for was the Children's Committee should have some health scrutiny over people such as Sarona. We've just seen the decision now by Sarona and actually their bosses, the Integrated Care Board, to basically restrict down autism diagnosis. The impact that then has on Bristol City Council services delivery, EHCPs, school placements is enormous. The idea that a committee that has powers and decisions wouldn't actually be able to bring the ICB in and have conversations with them and in public seems extraordinary to me, and that actually would be off with a separate health committee or subcommittee. I don't think that works. I think we need to have it joined up. So I think actually we need to be putting that health scrutiny in with the children's, in with the adults' care, maybe even in with the health and wellbeing, giving each of them the ability to work with the NHS and the ICB on those services that affect their committees. I'll shut up.
A really interesting point. Shall I let Councillor Francis and then Councillor Hunt?
I concede to you, Councillor.
Well,
you go ahead.
I mean, I'm going to start with the points that Lorraine, I know that you want to have a break, but I think we can do it quite quickly because I think probably we're all moving to the same space. So I agree with what you've said, Lorraine, that you know what it says on the tin is quite important, isn't it? And adult social care, especially in view of it being, you've got the list there about all that's involved with it, and we know it's the major part of the council's budget, that I think the message to the outside world that this is what this committee talks about is quite important. So I think it budgets it by calling it, whatever it was, sorry, my computer's gone
Healthcare and well-being.
Healthcare and well-being. So, because also, we've got the statutory responsibility to have a health and well-being board. And I think that that's where some of that kind of questions about the Sirona thing, which, as you know, we disagree with it as well and weren't cited on it as the administration, and the three of us, my colleagues in South Gloss and North Somerset feel the same, and you know, we can continue with that, but that's a separate issue. So adult social care will be a committee. There will be a health and wellbeing board. So then the issue about health scrutiny, and I think you're right that both the Children's Committee and the Adult Social Care Committee will have a view around a Sirona type issue that might come up in the future. But what I was wondering was whether at the moment we've got health scrutiny, and then we've got the JHOSC, the Joint Health, which is across the three local authorities that are in the ICS, Integrated Care System footprint, and whether actually we have those issues looked at across the Joint Health Committee. This will need conversations with our neighbours, but the same as the points that Dave Bredwell made about Wickham, for example. We're going to need to talk to our neighbours about those things. But I just wondered whether that because the scrutiny comes back to Jeff's point, the scrutiny is done within the committees as the decision is moved forward. So children's and adults will look at their bits of that, and then the scrutiny of the health system, given that we are in a joint health system, I think should be done jointly, although that's a suggestion that I've made, just to stop duplicating, triplicating all the places where the same issues are talked about.
And because if we consider the fact that Bristol are going to a committee system but BNSGG isn't, there's going to be a slight kind of different nuances that will come up from that slightly. I haven't thought it through properly, but I know there will be. So it's really important that, JHOS would be the overarching.
Yeah. I mean, South Gloss is has a committee system anyway, isn't it? So, that's why...
No, it's leaders.
No, they
have it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say,
sorry.
I understand they're going to.
Yeah.
So the scrutiny thing has to be over as it stands now, and I don't know how we make that happen, because it does need to sit, kind of like we sit back and we look at the whole process of health.
Because health and wellbeing, I'm just going to say very quickly one thing on the health and wellbeing board. And many local authorities, we don't, but we did used to, has cross-party representation on the health and wellbeing board. So you have, let's say, the three largest parties or whatever comes out next May, because the majority of the health and wellbeing board is made up of partner representation. It shouldn't be a council committee.
Right. I just want to. I'll let you know in a second. It's lost. Is it actually lost? Yeah. Right. We've got a couple of minutes before I want to go to a break. I'll let I'll let Jeff come in a sec, but I do think all of this discussion about public health needs to accumulate in a decision, and I'm going to ask you to maybe propose a decision or like formulate something. Or you can. Right. So we'll come to Jeff and then.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if we're going to have a break, we really need to conclude this by reaching a discussion, otherwise we'll rerun the debate afterwards.
Yeah.
What I was going to suggest, however, with health scrutiny, given we've talked about it, and I recognise there's those who have a great deal of knowledge and understanding of it, and there's the rest of us.
Yeah.
And I would suggest, therefore, that it needs a gathering of interested parties to sit down and work out the best way. And that includes Helen and taking examples of people who know, but others who are involved in the process, to come back with a detailed recommendation so that we're recognising health scrutiny has to be in what one of the committees has a lead responsibility for, but we actually work out where that works and we park that one, but we have to decide the rest of the committee format of what we're recommending, because otherwise that'll take us to 1 o'clock and we won't get on for responsibility.
All right. I think I agree with that. Do you?
So we agree on the what, but then it's the how.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. If I could address a couple of things that came up in the debate after I spoke. Firstly, Tim, no, there's not been any decision made to not have remote working, but some of us actually believe, and I think you're probably the same gap, is so fundamental that it actually happens that we actually have to have that principle in mind, even though in lots of cases the detail will have to come in over a period of time. So it's the fundamental thing, and that applies to yourself as well, Jeff, because I wasn't suggesting that as of day one, all these decisions are immediately thrown to committees that we haven't actually got. But what we do need to have is the commitment that we can move there, and therefore that takes into account not putting the cart before the horse with regard to the size and structure of committees as well.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for that clarification. Right. Do we have something that we can vote on?
I think so. I'm just trying to write it.
Right. I'll stall for time.
No, do it with some help. Should we do it? So we can go to vote.
All right.
So the vote would be 8 committees that would be strategy and resources, adult social care, public health and communities, homes and housing delivery, children and young people, environment sustainability one, and then I just need some economy and skills, and then my future slides. What are the last 2?
Transport,
Transport,
and children and young people.
Yeah, I've got children and young people.
Strategy and resources. That's
Got
one.
that,
Home and communities, healthcare and well-being, which we're changing the name of to adult social care. Environment.
Yeah.
Economy and skills.
Yeah.
Children and young people.
Yeah.
That's 8. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. That would be the decision.
What's in homes and communities?
It's homes and housing delivery.
Homes and housing delivery.
And then part of the decision,
I
communities.
did email some words if you want to show on the screen.
well done, Marvin.
Sorry, I was enjoying you doing that so much.
Oh, cheers, mate. Thank you. There's already a panel there, so and then as part of that decision, as we said, health would like to do a bit of an offshoot to go between Lorraine, Helen and Tim and the officers to work out how that would actually work. And I'd be happy to contribute to a similar exercise for licensing and planning.
I think that I still have a question about, are we deciding now? I'm literally asking, because I thought we'd sort of already decided, but then we didn't, about whether health scrutiny is definitely a separate subcommittee. That's something we did decide, right?
I think that's going to be part of this discussion.
I think these guys should just pick that up.
Okay, they're just going to pick that up.
Agree.
Right.
I think to resolve
Okay, no, that's fine.
how
That's
that
fine.
works.
I wasn't sure if that was covered. Okay, thank you. Okay, right then, let's take a vote on.
That's my list.
All coming up on the screen.
Chair, is it possible to summarise that list again?
Go on the screen. Let's go on the screen. It's nearly going on the screen. It's slightly different.
Actually, whipped up the graphic, so
Marley.
I did open paint briefly and then was like, no, this is silly.
Nobody likes each other.
So it's option 2 for the paper,
Option 2.
I think, with these changes. Option 1, option 2.
Option 1, I thought.
Well, it's neither of the options.
No,
Yeah,
I
it's
know.
an
No,
amendment.
it's an amendment to
Bits
Yeah.
of one more than an
All right.
amendment to.
Yes.
Which option are we amending?
Option 1.
Option 1.
Because it's different to. Like, we're just taking out the communities bit, effectively. But that's the amendment. It doesn't matter which one it's from.
I think we.
But we're saying it's from option
The
one,
list
fine.
I just read out then with your help was
Yeah.
the 8 committees,
Yeah.
and I think that is the vote, isn't it? Is it on
Yeah.
the-
Yeah. Right. So.
Could you list those again, please?
Yeah, we're about to have a break, so you can write them down from the screen. Shall we vote? Let's do a vote. Can we do a vote, please? Or no?
Well,
Yeah.
it's not very clear, to be quite frank.
You're still not clear?
Apologies, I'm really sorry. I would really like clarification. What is considered to be in the communities group? Because we talk quite a lot about
I've got a list here. All of these things
Yeah.
with double stars.
what
I think Marley is about to send you a list.
Can we do this after the break?
Yeah.
I said committee, Marley, will be...
That's just us. So, in 2 seconds, I'll read it out.
Being a good captain.
All right, everyone.
Let me suggest officers draw something up.
No,
You
no,
know,
do it now.
Right, Lucy, I'm even
I
with you.
can, do you want me to read it out? I've got it here written.
Hang on.
Everyone. Okay, so the people who are not clear are talking. They're talking to each other. They're just talking to each other. Right, I'm going to try and make this clear. We've got the names of the 8 committees coming up in a set
Sorry about that.
with bullet points this time. There we go. Make it as big as you can. Communities. So if you go to option 2.
I mean, look at the list, I mean, look at that, there you go, that's what I would have read out. Strategy resources, adult social care, hands and high delivery, public health. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Well done, Marley, thank you.
Okay.
And that's 8.
That's the 8.
That's the 8 that we want to vote for.
And, sorry, Chair. And I think what Councillor Poultney was saying, that he wasn't sure
Yeah.
what the detail was. So that's not what we're necessarily voting on. We're just voting on the
So
additional committee. Yeah.
we'll essentially, I'll take us to a vote on this, assuming that the officers are competent to identify which other
I think that's the fun
communities
part.
are. Is that okay,
So
Guy?
if you argue against that, you argue that the officers are incompetent. That's how the chair just set you up.
Is that not okay? or do you want to see it first, Guy? Because I've got some
Chair, can I just make a point? I think we've all discussed this and recognised that this is going to evolve.
Yeah.
So what's going to be agreed now is an outline.
Yeah.
We'd expect officers to put some meat on that, whether that will be possible before for the paper that's going to full council. But for the records that we have, we'd expect meat on that.
Right.
We will discuss it and evolve because there will be anomalies that need changing. And I think we've understood that actually there will be anomalies that need changing from May next year because there will be practical things that will need to be swapped. So we need to make sure there is a mechanism that allows allocation between the committees to take place as is pragmatic to enable quick decision making. So don't let's get hung up on exact wording and exact specifics. What we're talking about now is an outline. We set that and everything else will fit into place.
All right.
And I have total confidence in the officers.
I do too. Okay, I'm going to take a vote on these 8 things. So, who's in favour of these headings?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
9, I think. 9? Oh no, it's 10, sorry, 10.
1, 2,
10.
3,
10.
4, 5,
10.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 for yes.
Abstentions
2.
and against none. Okay, right, 10-minute break. We'll be back in 11 quarter.